Brought to you in association with Grendel Press. This is Werewolf the Podcast, a serial killer drama.
This is Werewolf the Podcast, the serial killer drama, and we are on episode 180. Gosh, who knew we'd get so far? Tomorrow we are on the exciting podcast with, I don't know if he'll take it nicely if I call him an influencer because he's sort of our age. Well, he is an influencer, Mr. George Kavanagh, and we are on Cocktails with Cav, which is an podcast, so I will leave a link down below. You can listen to me and Gregory Alexander Sharp there talk about this thing and what's happening and how it happened and all that kind of stuff. It was really good to do, and we had some cocktails and we sat down and chatted, so if you get a chance, go listen to that. Other than that, follow us, go down to the description-y thing down there with all the words in. You can go to the Facebook group where there's loads of like-minded lunatics. There's X, because it's not Twitter anymore, and Instagram and all those different kind of things. Come and join us, come and say hello and things. Anyway, let's get back to the story. Here we go.
The Professor. I'm not too fond of flying. No, it's not that. I mean, I like flying, just in a proper aircraft. You know, those with proper wings that are there and solid and wingy. This aircraft is it's one of those helicopters. And I'm not too fond of flying in these rickety old things. No, let's take that up the scale from not fond to... I'm utterly bloody terrified of it, okay? Well, the weather outside is frightful. I know, the opening line of a classic crooner's song. Francis Albert Sinatra. I'm glad he listened to me and carried on his musical dreams. He was up for giving it in when relatively young and becoming a full-time gangster. I told him he could carry a tune and charm half the world with his charisma. I was so right. He became a very good and helpful friend, actually. He had the links I needed when there was that great Thunderbird incident of '58 just outside Vegas. Although the after-party was a life-and-death experience in itself, those guys really knew how to party. Modern rock stars have nothing on the Rat Pack parties. The last parties of true class. The nostalgia that the thought brought me helps for a moment, but is quickly gone, because the weather outside is frightful. And as a consequence, this journey is not delightful. I shan't break into song. My interaction with Frank brought about a positive outcome. My interaction in the case of the helicopter was, I suppose, positive for the world in general, but for me it was shit. It was a bet with a friend that brought about these ridiculous things. You know, Igor Sikorsky bet me that he could make these things commercially viable. The bet was 20 cents. He was an aerospace engineer who made a packet back in the day. It wasn't a lot of money now, and it wasn't a lot of money even back then, but as with rich folks like Igor, it wasn't the value of the bet. It was just the bet. Being thrown around the heavens now, I wish I'd have won that bet. I might need to convince Bosworth, my genie friend, to give me that wish he owes me. I mean, look at these things. They're ridiculous. A big, delicate fan on the upper surface rotates to lift, while a little rotor at the back stops the whole bloody thing rotating with it. It's a stupidly designed thing. How could a government allow these things to fly? They're bloody stupid. I could see helicopters being made for what would Ernest say? Some sort of jest. But should we make them commercially viable? I thought they'd just always be too dangerous for sane people to use, but no. I sit now in this Wildcat Mark I. It's a cutting-edge tactical helicopter, and we're flying through weather that the pilot has told someone on the ground is
causing difficulties.
Causing difficulties is not what I want to hear when floating in the sky under a big fan. Causing difficulties in flyboy lingo means he's struggling to keep us in the air. And he is, forgive the parlance, shitting his pants. What am I supposed to do? I don't trust these damned machines at the best of times, and I'm in something that I don't believe should fly by an unsure pilot in lousy weather. I know I can't die, but crashes are not the nicest of experiences to go through. They are never painless and instant in my experience, and I should know. I've had my fair share of crashes, or as I like to call them, sudden stops. I reach for the sick bag and get a couple of smiles from the big buff gentlemen in uniforms with me. You can tell these guys are either mercenaries or the creme de la creme of special forces by the way they look, like bags of shit wearing jeans, having massive beards and long hair. It seems like the best soldiers in the world, I suppose. These are SPS or SAS or whatever. They want to look nothing like soldiers that you might imagine in your mind.
Feeling a bit peaky there, sir.
Comes over my headphone set. Must have originated from the beard leaning towards me. He doesn't manage to keep the mirth from his tone. Sod them. I don't care what they think of me as I prepare my bag for what's feeling like the inevitable. Then a massive judder runs through the airframe as air pressure causes turbulence and throws us around in the sky. The two big buff gentlemen grab hard for support in the seats. Yes, not so brave now, eh? As the aircraft settles for a moment, I give what was the chatty but now tense and pale-looking beard my sick bag, and I dig another from my pocket. He takes it slowly from my hand, almost apologetically. I pat him on the knee before returning to my flight from hell. As we bounce around the sky and my stomach bounces around uncomfortably in what feels like my chest, I need to do something as a distraction. I'd still only been told that I was coming and that Will was suspected of murdering a lot of people. What would it mean for me, though? I spoke over the comm to the pilot. "Have we an ETA for landing?" I asked over the crackling, distorted device.
It could be any second if the weather keeps this up, sir. You must be damn important.
He told me.
I think we could be on deck in the next 15 to 25 minutes. The winds are... Hold on, the winds are not going to be kind. And...
Fate's Realm.
We are now somewhere that time is not. Two sorcerers now sat with fate at a green baize table in the halls of the non-god. He, as usual, was his big black cloaky self, all manicured beard and manicured nails and manicured mind. Across from him was, well, you would recognize him as the magician and all-round street wizard, David Blaine. He wore an overly washed black t-shirt and had jeans to match. Dots of, wisdom lighted his eyes. That's what it looks like, honestly. On the other side of the table is... Wow, I thought he'd left us. I mean, I suppose he has. Maybe things are different here, though. Wherever he is, on the other side of the table was the lovable family TV presenter and magician, Paul Daniels. If you don't know who Paul Daniels is, he's well worth a look up on the old tube of you, as he was actually a great entertainer in his day. I saw him at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival a couple of years before he died. He really was very good, actually.
Greg.
Oh, sorry. Back to the point of the pointlessness, you know. He sat there looking like a little Yoda-esque figure, wise beyond his years, mumbling something on the edge of audibility. I could just make it out.
You will like this, and not a lot, but you'll like it.
Over and over again to himself, he's just sat there prattling on. Fate smiled at the two men.
Welcome, my friends, as the two greatest sorcerers of human history. I wanted to try something today. I wanted to see if either of you could beat me at dice. And if so, tell me how you do it. I need your help.
Ho ho! You'll like this, and not a lot, but you'll like it,
said Paul Daniels. Fate paused in confusion before accepting this as a form of yes from the diminutive magician.
Well, I think you'll find magic is not about having a puzzle to solve. It's about creating a moment of awe and astonishment that can be a beautiful thing,
said David Blaine. Fate turned to him and gave him a proper look. He wondered if he was doing the right thing. Looking at the two of them with those eyes of green glowing fire, his mind was in a quandary. It's not very often that a mind like his has a quandary to mess up his thinking. Normally he knows. He never has a quandary. He just knows. Fate picked up the dice from the table. He had to create a new set as the last set had disappeared with Lucifer. Again, a quandary. He had no idea how she stole them. As said, he was in a quandary, but he was going to go unquandary. He thought about the word. Having never used quandary before, he felt that it sounded acceptable to have an unquandary somewhere in his vocabulary. He addressed his two guests now.
I just need to know how she did it. How did she create more of my dice without my knowledge, and how did she manage to get them all to roll a 6?
He asked them.
Well, I think you'll find magic is not about having a puzzle to solve. It's about creating a moment of awe and astonishment that can be a beautiful thing,
said David Blaine. Fate paused and looked at him with... Well, he was in a quandary again. Had he chosen the right people for this?
Well, you see it. Look, I just bloody need to know, all right?
Fate reiterated. Paul Daniels suddenly stood at the table and threw 7 dice onto the green baize.
You will like this, and not a lot, but you will like it,
said the diminutive yet mighty sorcerer as he rolled 7 6s with a knowing wink. The Professor. I had thought the worst of today would be the flight, but no. We'd finally fallen out of the sky into a field on the outskirts of Wick, where a couple of local police cars were waiting, and the obligatory black van of the Special Forces stood on guard. An officer was waiting by the car, and she stood to attention for some reason with her cap held at her waist. We both covered our heads and waited for the helicopter to relaunch itself into the maelstrom of the night.
Sergeant Heathcote, I presume?
I had to shout. I smiled and held out a hand to her, which she looked at with some confusion before realizing I offered it as a greeting. Sometimes I forget that gentlemanly protocol is no longer de rigueur these days. Eventually she tried to take the offered hand in a hand that was holding her cap. She froze, obviously embarrassed, as she held the hat in front of her. It looked as though she was offering it to me as a gift. I could feel that she died a little bit inside at this mix-up. She looked down at the ground and was silent as she thought. I smiled and kept my hand out and laughed, but not in an unkind way.
Thank you, but I've just eaten. I couldn't manage another thing,
I told her, taking my eyes to her hat. She smiled, and her eyes met mine. I smiled at her. She responded with a tentative laugh and relaxed a little.
What's been done since the incident?
I asked the young officer. Again she looked embarrassed.
Nothing?
She said. She was going to continue, and I know it wasn't gentlemanly, but I interrupted her.
Perfect,
I said.
So, young lady, can you take me to the pub, please?
I asked her. I know it sounded a little flippant, but I limit the amount of fear I generate in these moments by my parlance. I knew the scene I'd be viewing soon would be horrifying, and I knew that it was unlikely that the local law enforcement would have ever seen anything like a werewolf attack. We turned to the cars parked at the gate. As we pushed through the wind and murk, nothing was said. Getting to the police car, she opened the door for me to access. Well, my goodness, how things have changed in this modern world. Oh, I don't think this contemporary way of thought is wrong. Please don't take me as old-fashioned, but with the change of fashion and style, it always takes a little longer for me to catch up on these ideas of the day. She opened the door for me. Crazy. The car flashed through the wind-swept suites. There was no traffic. There was no traffic at all. I have never been to a town or city where the roads are completely empty before. It looked like Will had done his work on the entire town population, even knowing it would be impossible for him to work on such a scale in such a short time. The thought did actually cross my mind. I knew if I told him that, he may have taken it as a challenge to do so. Bins and bits were strewn across the roads. The swirling air was full of shrapnel. We went through these empty streets. Sirens were off, but the engine noise battered off the buildings we passed, as did the crazy weather. We got to the Crown Inn. Ironically, it looked dead outside, which I suppose it was. And there was only one police car there. It was a shock for me to see this. Just one car. 2 police uniforms were snoring in the front seats as we drew up. They quickly sat up and wiped the sleep out of their eyes. Oh, to be in the police service in a place like this. Can you imagine an easier job? Well, until now, that is. I smiled. If this had been in any other place, these streets would have been flooded by the press and police, even on a night like this. Sirens would be adding their noise pollution to the night. Yellow tape would be everywhere. Lights and hundreds of people would be milling about. But this was not my usual anywhere. This was Wick. And if I could have chosen anywhere to try and cover up a werewolf atrocity, well, this was it. Finally, our car pulled up, and the sergeant stepped out. She was quite small, and the wind caught the door, and she was somewhat unceremoniously dragged from its interior. I braced myself against such a happening and left the car. The building was in darkness. I was going through mental preparation to enter the place. I have a few centuries of dealing with the mess that violence creates, but you never get fully used to it. I have seen it all, though. I was by the side of Henry V on that famous St. Crispin Day when I saw the majority of the French aristocracy murdered in cold blood on a muddy field. A muddy field that was made only more so by the rivers of blood that ran there after the fact. Knights trapped in mud, having their throats cut. I was part of and saw the aftermath of the charge of the Light Brigade, where our cavalry on a misconstrued order charged the Russian artillery batteries. I'd been too late that day to give new orders to General Brudnell, and a part of my soul will always be played upon for those losses that were so unnecessary. Oh, then there was the Somme. Haig was a fool who should have been shoved up against the wall and shot that first day, or before it if we'd been luckier. I shook my head to clear it of past regrets and pain.
Has anyone entered the crime scene?
I asked the larger of the two police officers wrapped against the wind.
No, sir. We were told someone important's been in and seen it, but we don't ken who that might be. Do you get me? We were just told to sit here and stop anyone trying to get in. You know what I mean? Now, what's happened, sir?
He asked.
I can't say,
I'm afraid. I told him. The man took it well and nodded.
Well, we've a lot of missing people to go search for. Do you mind if we head off? Me auntie's not seen her Ricky since he went out on Donald's stag this morning. They must have had a great night. Now we need to go and find him. Sober him up a wee bitty.
He chatted on. I smiled and nodded, patting him on the back as he climbed back into the car. I had a van full of soldiers if I needed them. I smiled as he retreated to the confines of the vehicle. I could hear him complaining about the fact that he was supposed to be with them and how he'd obviously missed out on a night of great crack. I shook my head. I had a feeling that I'd be seeing Ricky before him this night. Leaving Sergeant Heathcote in the car, I went into the building. I only had torchlight initially from my mobile telephone. I could feel the stickiness of the carpet clawing at the soles of my brogues as I walked. This could be due to a number of reasons, such as a leak from the storm, a carpet beer-caked and uncleaned over a generation, or... well, you can guess what. I lifted a shoe to look at the bottom of it. Yes, blood. Replacing my foot on the floor, I put some of those thin rubber gloves that I'm supposed to wear at crime scenes these days onto my hands. I'd be glad of them in the next few moments. I patted the inside of the doorway for a light switch, which I found. Again, there was a sticky quality to it. I paused. I did not want to do this, but I had to. I took my fingers from the switch, and without focusing the light on them, I rubbed them together as I thought, and prepared myself. Flicked the switch. The lights brought... they brought... hell. I have a stomach that has seen horror for decades and centuries, but this... The room was littered with broken furniture and broken human bodies. Blood spattered almost every surface. I brought a kerchief to my mouth, not from the smell of the blood. Flesh blood does not smell bad at first, but it was the other strewn body contents that gave the place this stench. I cannot tell how many people were there. Will had ripped and torn their bodies well after their deaths. One man was splayed on the bar. From years of sadly earned knowledge, I knew the signs of torture. The signs of a sadistic death. This poor man had died slowly and in agony. Will had taken his time over this, and he had enjoyed it. An eye was taken from its orbit and hung limply on a cheek. His jaw was on his chest, removed from his head. One arm had been broken innumerable times and lay in a heap still attached to his shoulder. The clothes and skin of the man's chest had been peeled back from his flesh. It was horrifying. It was horrifying. I had been wrong about the man. The man. Will was no man. He was an animal. And then I saw it. Another against the bar. This poor sod had had his testicles removed and hung from his cheekbones. Was this a message for me?
Oh God. Ooh, that is a message, isn't it? If you don't know, that was actually how in history supposedly Simon de Montfort was paraded around villages after he was killed with his bollocks hanging either side of his nose. Obviously it wasn't Simon de Montfort, because I feel like I'm being patronising telling you that, but I had to think about it. Anyway, remember, Greg also has 2 wonderful short stories out for Halloween. Go and read those. They're really good. They don't take very long to read if you're not a great reader, but they are worth reading. Very, very well written. And remember, we're on Kavanagh's show, George Kavanagh, so go to the link in the thingy and do stuff. Cheers. Love you. Bye.
Brought to you in association with Grendel Press. This is Werewolf the Podcast, a serial killer drama.